Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. My name is Irina, and I'm the event planner for the Redmond Reactor Space. Before we get started, I have a few things to go over. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience as well as our presenter. We encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Useful links will also be shared in the chat. This session is recorded and will be available on demand in 24 to 48 hours on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. Which brings us to today's session. This session will run approximately 1 hour to an hour and a half with questions throughout. And I'll now turn it over to our speaker for introductions.
Okay, my name is Ron Sumida, and I'll be doing the presentation today. I think some of you maybe have heard my earlier ones. I've been working with Microsoft technologies for over 25 years, actually. I started all the way back doing user interface programming on Windows 3.1. So that's how far back I've been working with the Microsoft stack, and I've been following it ever since, all the way up to like where we are now with .NET 6 and some of the other Microsoft technologies now that Microsoft owns GitHub, which is very appropriate for what we're going to talk about in this session. And I work with a lot of open source technologies too, which is also related to what we're going to be talking about in this session as well. So I started working a lot with about 6, 7, 8 years ago, JavaScript, TypeScript, Angular, React. And lately I've been doing a lot of Docker and Kubernetes. And I'll tell you, the number one thing that I've been doing in the last year and a half or so is identity management, specifically Azure AD B2C. So I jump around to a lot of different things, but given how much open source I do now, and given that Microsoft has embraced open source, it's very appropriate given the fact that we're going to talk about how to contribute to an open source project in this module. All right, so here's the general list of things that I'm planning to talk about. We'll look at how to first find an open source project to which you can contribute. Then we'll look at the tasks that are involved in figuring out an appropriate contribution and in talking to the folks who are maintaining the GitHub site about the fact that you do want to contribute, how you go about doing that, the proper protocols for it. We'll look at creating a pull request. That's going to be the big topic of this talk, is really seeing the proper way to create a pull request. And one of the things, if we have time left over at the end, I'd like to do is show you what happens a little bit behind the scenes when you make a pull request and ultimately it's approved. So we'll see if we have time to do that, but it's kind of nice if you're sitting on one end of that pull request, making the request to say, here are my changes. I'd really like to see those changes get incorporated into the open source software. But what's that process look like on the other end of it, where the maintainers are examining your pull request and ultimately deciding whether to approve it or not, or whether to make you go off and make improvements on what features you might have added or what changes you might have made. Along the way, we'll talk about implementing best practices. So that involves communicating with the open source maintainers and performing code reviews. And also, we'll look at how to find and engage open source communities. We'll talk a little bit about that toward the end. First thing I want to make you aware of is a little bit about GitHub and what GitHub is about and what they say on their website, in fact, as their objective. You should know that GitHub is the home of open source projects. It is the de facto standard place where people put their repositories for their open source projects. And the quote directly from their website is, where the world builds software. And there are millions of developers and companies that use GitHub for managing software. The type of management that they do is building, shipping, and maintaining software. And it is the largest and most advanced development platform in the world. So what we'll be talking about is open source software in general. We just talked about GitHub specifically, but open source software in general, and about how it relies heavily on the community for long-term sustainability. So this is why, like we're talking about in this session, why it's so important to be able to contribute to the open source software projects that are out there, because this is what keeps them going. And that involves making a meaningful contribution to the repository, the kinds of projects and properties that will make an impact. That's one of the things that you have to look for. Gaining familiarity with the project itself and the community standards that surround it, and working with making contributions to open source projects involves some knowledge of Git. So I'll show you minimally what you need to know about Git, and along with that, a little bit of the tooling necessary for you to be able to make changes to what's in a project and be able to ultimately make that pull request that I was alluding to earlier, so you can get those changes approved and then merged into the code base. Also, what's involved is GitHub. You'll need a GitHub account. I'll tell you about the prerequisites coming up in a moment, but you're going to have to be working with the GitHub website as well. A very big aspect of what I want to cover in this session is the do's and don'ts of communicating with the project maintainers, and also some of what you need to know about for the process of conducting code reviews. And your big goal in making a contribution, of course, is for that to be successful, in that you'd like to ultimately see whatever changes you make or modifications that you want to have occur to an open source project. You want to see that get incorporated into the code base. And we'll talk about what's necessary to submit a successful contribution to an open source GitHub project and how to follow best practices along the way. The prerequisites for what you will need are, number one, if you don't already have one, you'll have to establish an account on GitHub. In fact, let me take you to the GitHub website. Just so you know, because I've already have a GitHub account, I'll have to open this up through a new incognito window because my browsers have already cached access to GitHub for my logins. GitHub.com. I want to show you what it looks like when you just go straight in without anything cached to begin with. This is what you'll see. If I go in on either one of my two web browsers that I primarily use, which are Edge and Chrome, again, because there's a lot of stuff cached on there, it's going to go right to my GitHub, my local GitHub page, as opposed to this more global one. But what you would do to get a GitHub account, of course, is come to this website. First time you come in, it will look just like this, given that you will not have anything cached. And then you'll need to click on sign up to get an account. All right, so that's the beginning of the process. And you're brand new to all of these technologies. That is step one in order for you to begin working with open source software and making contributions to the community. You'll also need some environment for navigating and editing files in GitHub. So basically, that's whatever your favorite editor is. I would suggest, though, personally, Visual Studio Code in the absence of anything else, because code is really literally my general purpose editor. If I have to be able to make changes to anything code related, that's not .NET. I still use Visual Studio for anything .NET related, but just about everything else, I'm using Visual Studio Code. And if you force me to use code even for .NET, I would not complain, because the support there, even for .NET, is actually very good with code. So you'll see me use it a little bit in this session. Although, given that there's not very much editing I'm going to need to do, a lot of it is working with the tooling and knowing how to navigate around to the GitHub website. It's going to be more of that rather than me writing a lot of code in this session. If you want to see what the material from which this talk was derived, this is the link for the page you can go to. I'll just take you there right now by clicking on it. That has the overview of what this session is about right here. Contribute to an open source project on GitHub, and also has just some introduction, identify where you can help, the process of doing that, contributing to an open source repository, creating your first pull request, the next steps, and ultimately a knowledge check, which I would encourage you to go through and do. And then the summary is on the back end. And basically, I wrote these slides from the content that's on that page. So if you prefer to read it on a web page, you can see it there as well. Also, as a note, I did put into the chat session for this talk the link to where you can grab these slides. So I put them up on Dropbox, so you can pull them down from there if you would like to follow along with the slides, as opposed to having to read it all off a web page. And then there's a just brief reminder, there's a survey. So at the end, please fill out the survey. First step in contributing to an open source project is finding a project that needs contributions in the first place. And what I would encourage you to do, which is what the web page that I just pointed you to in a moment ago also encourages, is start with something that you know. Start with projects that you are already using. So I'm assuming that you're probably using some tools, let's say, that are very likely to be open source tools. If you really like them, that might be a good candidate as a place to go and look for what types of contributions you could make there. Or another option would be projects that maybe you're not working with the tool, but you're interested in it. If you have a particular interest in an area, then you may want to go and look at the open source projects that are available in that area, and then see what of those projects are looking for contributions in certain ways. And if that matches up with your skill set, that might be a really good candidate. You want to look for things like errors, updates, and improvements in that project where you can contribute. And it's important to know that all contributions are valuable. Going in, you don't necessarily have to have a huge amount of experience or knowledge. The most important thing is having that will to help. I'm always a big proponent of this personally. I've always felt that while you do need a certain level of background knowledge, obviously if you're going to communicate be able to communicate with the maintainers and contribute to a project, you obviously need some level of knowledge and experience. But going in, you don't have to be at all an expert on it. A lot of it can be learned along the way. And as you read more and more, for example, about the issues pages, and you get more familiar with that project, you'll naturally pick up a lot of things that will give you more ideas about where you can contribute and how you can contribute. So that would be my advice as to a good way to think about getting started. I summarized in some links to websites that are really good starting places for finding projects. This one I'm going to go to in a moment. This is the general GitHub search so that you can find the various projects that are out there. There are several other links on this page. I'll leave it up to you to peruse through them. But they are ones that are generally good for you to be able to figure out ways to make a contribution to open source on GitHub. And for example, this one right here, getting started with GitHub, finding ways to contribute to an open source on GitHub. You can look at that. I'll just go ahead and click that link for a second just to show you what comes up when you do. And this is noticed from the GitHub docs. So that would be an excellent resource to at least start from, to get your feet wet in figuring out how to get going with a contribution to a project. But you might want to look at some of these others as well.
We have a quick question. Could you talk about the labels in GitHub issues? What is the meaning of this labels?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a few moments. I'll defer that question.
Thank you.
Sure. Because I am going to show you how you first find a project. Then once you find a project, I'll show you the labels. In fact, there's a dedicated slide that mentions the labels. So first step is searching for a project based on some topic of interest that you might have. This is where you want to go. Again, like I mentioned, if you already have a GitHub account and you've already logged into it previously, if you just go to github.com, where it's going to take you to is your local GitHub page, which is not like that page I showed you a moment ago when I referenced it through the incognito browser. But either one of those two is not really the place you want to go to if you're looking for search. You want to go here, github.com/search. So let me go to there. And this brings up the search page where you can specify a search term and it will show you the projects that match that search term. Or if you want to get more advanced about it and you have some specific more restrictive search you want to do, you can click on advanced search. So I'll just show you that briefly. You can search based on any one of these parameters. So from these owners in these repositories, certain date range that you're looking for, written in a certain language, and so on, right? So you may want to, if you find that the just base search is too restrictive, the one that you saw on this page, you may want to click on advanced search and then be able to narrow it down a lot more. But let me pick this one. Machine learning. This is a little bit near and dear to my heart because before I started doing all these Microsoft technologies, I was a PhD student in AI and did a lot of AI and machine learning in grad school, then found that there were no jobs out there for folks who had that background at that time. If I had that degree today coming out of school, I could write my own ticket. It's hard to believe based on how popular the field is now versus when I got out of school that people literally were unemployed. I knew a guy who graduated with a PhD in AI and was unemployed for a year. That's how bad it was when I got out of school. But now everybody's doing machine learning, and this is evidence of that. If I search for the term machine learning, you see the number of repository results that come back from that search, 399,313 results relating to machine learning. So that should give you some idea of how popular this is. Now, that may be a little bit unwieldy for you to try to go through and peruse that many results that come back. So, of course, that's where you might want to use the advanced search to restrict it down somewhat more. And this is another way for you to be able to find things a little more restrictively by looking under the topics link on the left side. So right here, you see 506 topics. I'll click there. And then this will show you things that are related to that, like machine learning, deep learning, PyTorch, scikit-learn, Jupyter Notebooks. By the way, there's this class I teach in machine learning. I taught it for Microsoft before, as a matter of fact. And we use these. We use scikit-learn, for example. That's a great Python module for machine learning. PyTorch, we use a little bit of that, open source machine learning library. So Jupyter Notebooks, I mean, that is like fundamental to doing machine learning, is Jupyter Notebooks, just from the standpoint of being able to test things out. It's a great visualization, coding environment, testing environment. I really love Jupyter Notebooks. So you see right away by clicking on topics, it showed me some of the machine learning related projects that I can tell you, if you work a lot in machine learning, you'll in all likelihood end up using, in all likelihood, all three of these, or at least a couple of them. Certainly Jupyter Notebooks and scikit-learn, I can almost guarantee that you're going to use if you work a lot with machine learning. So that's a really good way for you to first put in a search term, then narrow it down a little bit more with the topics, as you're seeing here. And for you to gain familiarity with the project, let's look into the details of a particular project now. I'm going to, again, stay with the machine learning theme. I'm going to pick matplotlib. And I'm choosing that just because of the fact that it has one particular link on there that I do want to talk about. And there's a slide on it coming up. So that's why I'm picking this one. There's no particular reason why I'm preferring this one over any of the others. Although, again, we do use matplotlib in the machine learning course that I teach. So this one right here, this link, I'll click on that. That will take me to the open source project for matplotlib. And I'm going to just pick this one to show you some of the major bits that you would want to gain some familiarity with. Most of these projects have documents at the top level of the repository for the license. So that would be here. This one has an actual folder for the license, but you can click and see the licensing info right over here. And as I indicated on the slide, that must contain an open source license for it to be an open source project. And if it doesn't have that, then it's not open source. So it's got to have a license in there. You'll always see that with any of these open source projects. The second major thing is the README. The README, often, I've seen some GitHub sites that don't always have much of a README or not much you can see, but README is typically displayed down below. If you scroll down, if you notice, what's being displayed here is the README. So you can either look at the README file directly, or you can typically go to a GitHub site, scroll to the bottom after you see the list of files and directories, and be able to get a more nice view of the README file right here. Also, some of the other things that are important are some notes about how you go about contributing to the project. For this particular matplotlib one, you'll see that right here, it's got a section on contribute, and it's got a full contributing guide. So I'm just going to click on that, show you what that looks like right over here. Yeah, and it takes you to a website where you can see the information, a matplotlib website where you see the information about contributing and issues for new contributors, submitting a bug report. So this one has pretty detailed information about contributing. This may vary from project to project, right? I wouldn't necessarily assume that all projects are going to have a dedicated web page like that just for the contributions. But in any case, this one is pretty refined and pretty elaborate. And given how widespread the usage of matplotlib is in the machine learning world, then I can see why this one is so formalized. Part of the reason I'm choosing this one is because of that. There's also the code of conduct. That's very important. I want to say a word about the code of conduct coming up here. Let me find the code of conduct part. Right there, code of conduct. I'll click on that. And this is what takes you to the page that indicates the contributor covenant, code of conduct, and the pledge, the standards, the enforcement responsibilities, and even what bad things can happen to you if you violate the code of conduct. Like, for example, a correction, a warning, a temporary ban, or a permanent ban. So I would highly encourage you, for any project that you're looking to contribute to, that you carefully read that code of conduct. Very, very critical bit to become familiar with. Right. There are communication channels available. So one communication channel is very important one is the issue tracker. So if you want to see the list of issues, then one way to do that is to go to the base website like this and put in issues on the back end. That's one way to get there. And that will take you to the issues page in a second. Here we go, where you can see some of these issues. And by the way, I know there was that question about the labels. So now you'll start to see the labels here in that. These are some of the labels for these various issues. And again, I'm going to talk about that in more detail. I was purposely deferring that because I wanted to show it to you in the context of looking at the list of issues like we're doing right now. So this is a very good place if, let's say you like the project, you now want to contribute, or maybe it's a tool, like I say, that you've been using for a while. Maybe even you have something in mind that you would like to contribute to a specific tool, like you found a bug in some library or tool that you're using. You go and look up the open source project, then you look through the list of issues to see if there's an issue relating to that. And if you find an issue relating to it, then of course you'd want to read through it and see what the current status is. If you don't find any issues regarding that, then that's something that's ripe for contribution. All right. But that's one of the number one things you want to look at is finding the issues. Now, there's another way to get to where I'm right now, the issues, which would be to just click here on that issues button, and that will take you to the same place. Again, it'll basically be the base address for your GitHub site that you're looking at, and then putting /issues on the back end there. There's also the pull requests. So this can be found by adding /pulls to the back end, or you can once again click on pull requests, either one. So you can see the general format, but if you want, you can just add pulls on the back end of the URL if you prefer to do it that way as opposed to clicking. And this will take you to, in a second, it's a little bit slow with my internet connection there, but this will take you to where you can see those pull requests out there, which are going to be a very big portion of what we're going to be talking about, like I said, coming up. That of all the functional things I'm going to talk about in this session, that's one of the biggest ones. And then the chat channels and forums, like Slack, for example, Gitter, IRC. There may be, depending on the GitHub site you're going to, a number of different channels available for you to communicate and work with the community to maybe suggest things, to find out what other people are suggesting, just like any other topic, right? There's discussion forums all over the internet for just about everything, and this certainly is no exception. So you might want to look at the chat channels and forums that are available for that as well. All right, so how do you identify tasks that you want to work on? And notice I mentioned that there's a dedicated part of a slide that talks about the labels. Here it is. It's on this bullet. I'm getting there. Don't worry. First of all, what about beginner-friendly issues? Well, one way to find that is to go to the project's contribute URL. So once again, base address, put /contribute on the end, like this. And that will take you to the contribute page. There we are. So it says contribute to this particular project. And you'll see right here, it indicates these are good first issues. So if you are just getting started with contributing to an open source project, this is a great place to go, is go to the contribute page. In fact, this is really good to know about because the other ones I've shown you so far are pretty easy to get to, right? Because you have these links along the top. But this one is good to know about because, again, for first-time contributions, this is an excellent place to go. And that will give you some idea of some of the beginner-friendly issues. Notice that most of these issues have these labels on them. So this is what was being asked about, is these labels. And for example, these issues, they're all labeled with good first issue. So that's an indication to you of what these labels are about, that they are a way of tagging these issues such that you have an idea of what that issue relates to. And since these are all ones that are good for first-timers to contribute, then that's why they're tagged as such. Some of these you'll notice, these labels are indicating they're documentation related. So your contribution doesn't necessarily have to be a coding contribution. If you find something along the lines of documentation that could be done better or a mistake in the documentation, that's a contribution as well. It's not like you necessarily have to be writing code in order to contribute to, let's say, a code library. There are other ways you can contribute beyond just writing code. Notice that there are tags for new features there as well. You may want to view issues indexed by the label. So the way to do that is to, again, go back to the URL and put on the back end /labels there. So I'm going to do that. And then you're able to actually see the various labels here, and you can then click on one of those labels and then see the issues that are related to that label, like that, right? So these are all documentation related issues, for example. So that's the story of the labels. They're really a way of tagging issues in a certain way such that you can categorize them. And then you could even search by using the technique I showed here, putting / labels on the back end of the URL so that you can find the particular label, and then from there be able to see the issues that would fall underneath that label. All right. Is there a question?
Yes. What kind of topics can be addressed in issues tabs?
In the issues tabs was the question?
Yes.
Oh, the topics. Well, basically, the issues are just, you think of them as categories. The type of topics that can be addressed within those categories, that really depends. Really depends in large part on the project itself that you're talking about. For example, I'll go back to documentation. These are all documentation related issues. So here's what I would advise. To get a really good sense of the answer to that question for a given project, I would do exactly what we're doing now. Go to the labels page like we were in just a moment ago. Find a label that sounds like it matches a particular area of interest within that project that you care about. And then I would spend some time perusing the issues that fall underneath that category. Like these are all, for example, the documentation related ones. And I think after reading that for a while, reading a set of these, then you'll have a really good sense of what kind of issues would fall underneath this category. Because I don't want to say in a blanket way that this is going to be the same for all projects, because each community, each open source community can be a little bit different. And one other thing I'll just point out to you as well, even the color scheme that's used, for example, notice that the documentation labels are in white text with blue background. That is not universal. So you might see another GitHub project that uses a different color scheme for their labels for documentation. So that's why I would say that even something as small as that, just the look of the labels, I've seen that differ from project to project. So the best thing you can do with regard to what issues would correspond to a certain category is to get a sense of what that particular community is like. And then once you know that, then you'll know where your issue or issues might fit in terms of labels. Hopefully that helps. Okay. So that's the story of the labels. Now, here's an example of what I was mentioning, where there might be an issue with a link to a pull request. This is one of the things that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about coming up in the next few minutes, because you can view these issues indexed by labels. The issues may have links to other issues or to pull requests, because it's quite possible that an issue is not just something in isolation. It may be related to another pull request. It may be related to another issue. And here's an example of this, where here's an issue with a link to a pull request that says it may be fixed by, and then has a link there to the issue that might fix that. So this is one that would relate to, I think this is from matplotlib actually, 22640. Notice how these are numbered so you can see the actual deprecation warning. And that would allow you to then come in. In fact, we should be able to see this. I'm going to go back up to the issues page for a second. And I'm going to see if I can find that exact issue, 22640. Open issues 22640. I'll search based on that in terms of the filtering. Oh, I think that's a closed issue. It's one closed issue. This is a way for you to find that. Here we go. Confusing deprecation warning when empty data passed to access with category units. So you see how I was able to search for that issue knowing the number going in, but then I just want to take you here and show you what that looks like when this is considered to be a closed off issue. Instead of showing you just a static screenshot, I'll show you the real thing on the page. Notice that this one is tagged as being fixed and fixed by this. So you can click there. That will take you to the spot that will show you for this issue, the fix of the incorrect deprecation warning. And that's an example of having a link between the two. Right. And this is an example of why it's important to peruse the issues before you even try to do any work at all, because it's quite possible the issue you're having may already have been solved. And you see here a way of you being able to navigate around in a GitHub site to determine, number one, is there an outstanding issue that is related to what you're interested in? And number two, if there is, has that issue been solved or not? And in this case, it's an issue that is closed off and apparently fixed by the 22719. All right. The reason I picked matplotlib, aside from the fact that it's a very good example since it's got everything that I wanted to talk about in terms of what is being shown on the GitHub site, it also has this link, which not all GitHub sites have, by the way. Not all GitHub projects have this, and that's a sponsor link. So if I click on that, it will show you a little pop-up that indicates how you can go about contributing in a monetary way in the case of matplotlib. So I'll click on sponsor there. Or actually, sorry, yeah, I can do it in either one. And here we go. Become a sponsor to matplotlib developers. And this, if you look at the right side, shows you how you can select a tier for contribution, monthly contribution, if you would like to contribute in a monetary way as opposed to having to contribute in a time-based way. So, or maybe some people might even want to do both. So I just wanted to show you an example, and I knew this page has a sponsor link on it. That's why I chose matplotlib, since it's an excellent example of the sponsor link right there. Again, a lot of GitHub projects I've seen don't have that, but this one does. Okay.
I have a question.
All right. So now that this question? Or?
Yes. Sorry, I wanted to go back to one. It was issues versus polls.
Okay.
I think they want to know the difference.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that'll become apparent when I get through this next section, but I'll summarize it for you right now, and then I'm going to take you all through pull requests. Basically, an issue is some problem or improvement that you see out there. That typically is what constitutes an issue. A pull request is when somebody effectively has a fix or a change or a modification or improvement, and they want to make that known to the maintainers. That's what a pull request is. And the pull request ultimately is your way of submitting your contribution. That's the way to think about it. And then now, of course, the maintainers aren't just going to blindly take your contribution and merge it into the code base. That would be extremely dangerous. Or in the case of, let's say it's a documentation contribution, maybe the contribution you have doesn't fit their standards. So under that case, they might come back to you and make suggestions for how to improve your contribution, or they might deny it outright, which is probably not going to be the case. It's more likely if they're not completely happy with what you've submitted that they're going to come back and say, yeah, here's what you can do to improve your contribution. Or in the case where it's really good, they might just say, we approve it, in which case they'll merge it into the code base. Or if it's not a code contribution, then they'll merge it into the existing project in whatever form that takes. All right. So once you have figured out how to find an appropriate open source project to which you want to contribute, and you have then figured out what an appropriate issue might be that you want to contribute to, then the next step would be to communicate your intent to participate. This is a key success factor in making a contribution to an open source project, because it ensures that your work will be helpful in the first place. You certainly don't want to do things like reinvent the wheel, like I mentioned a moment ago. You wouldn't want to spend a whole bunch of time trying to figure out how to fix an issue that somebody else has already fixed. Likewise, you don't want to spend a lot of time working on features and improvements that don't align with the project's values or best practices. So it's very important to communicate your intent to participate to begin with, and one place to do that is through that issues page that I mentioned. If you don't see an issue that's related to what you see as being a potential change or improvement, then you can you create a new issue there and have the conversation. Or if there is an existing issue, but you feel no one's addressed it appropriately, you can express your intent within the existing issue for you to make that contribution. It's very important along the way that you keep an open mind. You need to be receptive to feedback. And of course, you got to practice patience, because while there are maintainers who will get back to you, and not just maintainers, contributors as well, when you express your intent to participate, they may not respond immediately. I know I'm a software developer myself. Particularly software developers tend to be an impatient group of people. But keep in mind that in many cases, the contributors and maintainers of open source projects are people who have other full-time day jobs, and they get really busy with deadlines, so they may not be able to immediately respond to you. So it's very important that you do practice a degree of patience. Just as a note about this one, about being receptive to feedback. I still remember this when I was an undergraduate. One of the best professors I had, who actually went on to become very famous in the field of computer science that he was in, I still remember the rules that he told all of us. And he said these both in the class I took from him, and he spoke at our graduation. He said this at our graduation too. And one of his important rules was that you basically need to be able to take criticism. And this always stuck in my mind, right, of how important that issue is. And I realize now, many years later, how right he was about that. Right he was about all of the things that he told us in that session, where he said, look, you really need to, one of the most important things, as painful as it is, you have to be willing to take criticism. All right, so how do you communicate the intent to maintainers? And what way do you do this? Always communicate the intent before doing actual work. The issue tracker that I was just showing you is usually the best place. And for an existing issue, the assignee section indicates whether someone else is already assigned to it. It could well be the case. You found the issue. You see that maybe there's a discussion about that issue, but it could well be that while it's not resolved yet, somebody's working on it, right? And this is important to know, because obviously you don't want to spend a lot of time working on it from the ground up. If somebody's already done most of the work on it, or maybe is getting close to being completely finished with it, then certainly you don't want to start all over from scratch trying to address that issue. So this is a good way for you to, number one, see, is there someone else assigned to it? If there is, maybe even want to communicate with that person who's assigned to it to say, hey, what's the status on this? Is there some way that I can contribute, right? And by posting your comment indicating interest in working on the issue, that is a way for maybe that person who's contributing to work with you on it, perhaps. Or if there's nobody assigned to it, everything is clear, right? It's not an issue that's been fixed. It's not an issue that anyone is working on. Then your best bet is to create a new issue and indicate to the maintainers that you're very interested in working on whatever that thing is. And for a new issue, you want to follow the issue template if one is proposed. You want to clearly express your intent to work on the issue. And I would highly recommend this last bullet's critical. Get the maintainer's approval first if the issue requires a lot of changes. Keep in mind one of the big things, that ultimately whatever changes you make, particularly if they're code-based changes, they're going to have to be merged in with the current code base. What you generally want to do is keep your changes relatively small, because the bigger the changes that you make in one batch, merging that might cause all sorts of conflicts and headaches for the maintainer, which would make, therefore, that merge to be much more difficult. So by making the new issue and the changes that you make relatively small, it helps with that process on the back end. Like I said, if I have some time, I'll show you a little bit of what that process might look like in terms of on the maintainers end. And once you understand that, I think that will give you a greater sense of why I'm saying you want to generally keep your changes relatively small. So how do you go about checking for a given issue whether there's an assignee or a linked pull request? This is a screenshot of how you can see the assignees, whether no one is assigned, or for development for whether there's branches or pull requests out for it if it's a development related item. So looking over here, this is where you can see that development section. So this section of the screenshot, remember, this issue's been resolved already. And you can see from this one under development, it says successfully merging a pull request may close this issue. And then right down below, it says fix incorrect deprecation warning, and has the indication of the party that fixed it. So that is where you want to critically look when you peruse these issues. You want to come in, look at the issue itself. And one of the first places you'll want to look is see whether, number one, there's development that may have already been done or being done. And also, number two, assignees. Obviously, no one's assigned to this anymore because it's done, right? But again, if I go back to the issues, we'll look at some other issues, and we can pretty easily find some that are outstanding. Like I'll take this very first one. I don't even know what this one is because first time I'm looking at it. But you see, no one is assigned to this one, and development, no branches or pull requests. So this one's very clear. There's a bug summary that somebody posted here, an actual outcome. And if you scroll down a little bit, you see there's discussion about it, right? But again, looking on the right side, this one clearly not resolved. If you wanted to make a contribution and you were interested in this particular issue, that would be a good one to express your interest in, and then get approval from the maintainers for going forward with that. All right, so I've been talking about pull requests throughout this session, but I haven't formally defined it yet, and I promised that I would, and here it is. So a pull request, or PR, is the way that contributions are specified. What a pull request contains is a title and a description of the changes. It has one or more commits that constitute the proposed changes, and then comments where everyone can participate in the discussion about the changes, right? I remember actually when I team taught with some Microsoft folks, there was this class I taught for them about 3.5 or so years ago. And it was a Microsoft slide, but I really love this slide, so I can't take credit for it. But they had a slide that said, software development is a team sport. And I thought that was very appropriate. And it's very appropriate to what we're mentioning here, because you generally want, when you make changes, to be able to solicit contributions or comments about the changes you're making from the overall community. In other words, it's not something that you're just going to do in a vacuum, ideally. So that's why even a pull request where you're submitting your changes that you would like to see made to that project, that might well involve discussion or comments with other contributors or the maintainers. Code reviews, you know what these are if you've done software development. That gives you detailed feedback about the changes and commit suggestions that for the changes that you're looking to make. And status checks. Now, I got to caution you about status checks. Not all GitHub projects will have automated tests that the maintainers can put in place, but some of them do. And this is to ensure that your changes don't break existing code. Keyword here is automated. Some of them have automated ones, automated status checks. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this coming up, but I want you to be aware of that, because it may be the case that you go to submit a pull request and you get stymied by the automated status check, and generally it'll tell you or link to places where you can go and look to figure out what you need to do to set up your pull request in such a way that it will get by those automated status checks. So for pull request updates, these could constitute new commits, could be comments, code reviews. The process continues, though, through this until the project maintainers ultimately say, all right, we're satisfied enough with what you've done. We're going to approve. And then, like I said, the next step after that is to merge your pull request with the rest of the project. And if it's code that you are submitting in your pull request, that would involve merging your code into the code base for the project itself. Or another thing that can happen is they can reject the changes and close the request. Again, it's more likely that instead of a blanket rejection, assuming that you followed what I talked about at the front end of the process, where you communicated with the community and the maintainers to express interest in working on an issue first. If you've done that, it's probably pretty unlikely that when you submit a pull request, they'll flat out reject it, because obviously if they said on the front end that they were interested in having someone work on it, they're probably not going to flat out reject it, but they may come back to you and say, hey, this needs some additional work. And so they might give you some comments. They might review your code. You go back and fix it. You then update the pull request and comes back around and they go and do the review process again. And here are the steps now in creating a pull request. So the steps are: first, open the GitHub page of the project, click the fork button on the page to create a copy of the repo in your GitHub account. I mentioned earlier about how to set up a GitHub account. Once you set it up, then you find the project of interest that you want to work on, and you'll notice on the GitHub page for that project, there will be a fork button like this one. You click on that fork button, and for example, for me, I have a GitHub account set up. The handle for it is Ronald Sumida, and it will then fork or copy the project to my GitHub account for me personally. The reason why this needs to be done first is you obviously can't come in and just modify directly the GitHub project that you're seeing. You have to first create a copy, and that involves creating a copy into your local GitHub repo. And once you've done that, then normally what you want to do after that is to in turn clone it onto your local machine. So keep in mind that don't confuse the forking with the cloning. The forking process, this process, makes a copy into your local GitHub account, right? And that's what we're talking about doing right here. You would want to select your repositories from the account profile menu and then select the repository. I didn't have to do this process. Again, a bunch of stuff is cached on my browser session, so I don't have to do that part. But but you may have to do this the first time of selecting in your profile your repositories from the local profile. And then the next step, once you have done the fork. Now, I'm not going to do this one because it would take way too long. Matplotlib is big. I'm going to do a smaller one, and even this one will probably take me too long, but at least I want to show you the process, because a big part of what this is all about, this whole session is about, is what I'm covering right now. This is the most important part of functionally of this entire session. So once again, I'm going to go to the GitHub search page, because I'll tell you the one I'm specifically going to search for. And toward the end of this entire session, there's an exercise where you can go and replicate what I'm doing right now. But there is a GitHub project called First Contributions. I'm going to search for that particular one. This one is relatively smaller, right? And you can see what it's about. Help beginners to contribute to open source projects. So I'm going to click on that. That will take me to the GitHub page for this. This is one where you can practice, like we're going to do a part of right now, because obviously you wouldn't want to go practicing on like the Matplotlib one, where that's where tons of people are using it. This is a site specifically intended for this purpose that we're doing right now, for you to be able to practice forking, then cloning the repo, making a small change, and then making a pull request. So this is a very appropriate GitHub site to use for getting experience with making your first contribution. All right, so after you've done the fork, and I'm going to go ahead and do it, but like I said, this will still probably take too long, but we'll at least get it kicked off. So I'm going to create a new fork. Oh, I know why this is coming up, because I've already done it, actually. I've already created a fork of this because I didn't want to spend a whole bunch of time forking it. All right, I'll do a different one then. I'll do a different project so that you can see the whole process in action, but I'm not actually going to use the one that I'm going to fork because, again, some of these are just way too big. There's one that I did for, let me find a Node.js related one. That's a good one. Here we go. It doesn't really matter which one of these I do. I'm trying to find one that I think, yeah, this is a good one. The more generic Node.js GitHub site. There we are. And I'll do a fork on it. So when I click on fork, because I want you to see what this looks like from the ground up. Yeah, see, I don't have this one forked already in my local repo. So about all I have to do is click on create fork. And then usually the fork is pretty quick. It's the next step, clone, that takes a long time. But there we go. There we are. So you see where I am now. I am now in my GitHub repo, but I have one that's represents a copy of this nodejs.org. So that part is really quick. Now, the next step beyond that, for you to start making changes, theoretically, by the way, you could make the changes directly from within here. For example, if it was just a small change to the comments on something, you could come right into here and modify the files directly from within the GitHub site itself. Obviously, if you're coding, though, you're not realistically going to want to do that. You're going to want to bring it to your local development machine where you have the appropriate tooling available to work with it there. So that's why you normally do this next step, where you click on the code button, you then copy this URL that you see, and then go to a command shell, like I'm going to do right now. So I'll go to Windows Terminal. By the way, Windows Terminal, I have found to be the best command shell out there for Windows. Why is that not coming up? Terminal. Let me get in there and select it now. There we are. And it's taken a few seconds to come up. For some reason, it's a little slow. Oh, there we are. Just a little slow. Oh, now I've got two instances running because I was in. This is what I mean about software developers being impatient. That was me being impatient right there. All right. Then you'll want to find a folder on your local machine. I've already, prior to this session, I set up this folder called Demos Reactor off the root of my C drive. So I'm going to use that one, just so you know. There's nothing in there right now. I'm going to CD to Demos Reactor. Should be good enough for me to, come on. Oh, I think I need to, I'll just type it in. CD to, I'm going to CD the full path, C:\/ Demos Reactor. Usually does the completion for me automatically, but it wasn't doing it there for some reason. All right, I have nothing in here right now, as you see. And then now I can do a clone of the repo by doing git clone, and then that URL that we just saw a moment ago. And this will kick off the process of cloning the repo from your local GitHub repo to your local machine, which will all go into this folder that I have pointed it to. Remember, I CD'd to that folder first, and then after that, I'm doing this command. And that's what kicks off the clone. We'll see how long this takes. It's probably going to take an inordinate amount of time is my guess. But don't worry, I've got one cached, that first contributions one cached that I can work from, since it's more about the process than about the details of any one of these specific repos that I'm working with. So this is what I just copied I'm just kicked off the process of copying the repository to the local machine. I then CD'd to the project folder, and then you might want to create a new branch before you make modifications. Okay, let me see how far this is getting, how quick it's going through. It's not too bad, 12% so far. But this is an example of how to create a new branch. You can run git checkout -b and then whatever branch name that you want to use. For example, if you are making a coding contribution, you may want to call the branch feature. That's a very commonly used name, where that indicates that you're adding a new feature, and the primary branch is usually called name. Now, while you don't have to do this, I would highly recommend that for the reason that the maintainers, if you create a separate branch, it makes it easier for them ultimately when they go to evaluate the pull request and do the merge. All right. Let's see how far, 23% of the way through. Yeah, it's not going to come back that quickly. All right, then you make your changes to the project. Very important, by the way, if you are going to create a new branch, which I strongly encourage you to do, that you do that before you make the changes to the project, because those changes will then be a part of that branch by default. And then you'll want to stage the changes. So there's 2 steps before you can commit a change with Git. Step number 1 is you need to stage the change. The command for doing that in Git is git add, and then dot for the current directory. And to commit the changes, it's git commit, and then -m for the message that you want associated with that commit. I want to say a very important word about messages on commits. You're initially committing to your own local GitHub repo. Even at that, it's still very important to give each commit a descriptive message about what that commit represents. And it's also very important when you commit to commit frequently, because what you don't want to do is save a whole bunch of changes and just do one commit on the back end. That is in general not good practice. And the reason is, here's the analogy I like to use as far as commits. It's a little bit like rock climbing, climbing a mountain. I should say more like mountain climbing, where, the mountain climbers, they hammer pins into the rocks so that way they can only fall as far as their last pin. That's the way that I like to view commits, because what a commit allows you to do is to roll back. If you find you've made changes since the last commit that you don't like, it's very easy to roll back to the prior commit. But if you haven't committed for a long time, it can be very, very hard to go back to what you had before, right? So likewise, the message becomes very important if you do commit frequently, because now you want to be able to identify which particular commit corresponds to where you want to go back to. And I'm emphasizing this because, again, that class I was telling you about earlier that I co-taught with some Microsoft folks, they were emphasizing how important this was because they saw it with their own setup, their own GitHub repos, where certain people were making the mistake of committing and just calling their commits commit 1, commit 2, commit 3. You obviously don't want to do that, because there's no easy way when you come back to it to identify what particular changes go with which particular commits. So you want your commits to be meaningful messages. That's not so much for the pull request, by the way. Pull request is a little bit different. I'm talking about making your commits frequent and making the commit messages be meaningful for you, for your own look back at the repo to see what changes you made, when you made them. And again, if you want to go back to an earlier state of the world, it makes it much easier for you to go about doing that. All right, now that you have then made all the changes you want locally, then the next step is to push this up to your GitHub repo, right? Again, don't confuse the multiple parties in play. There's the centralized GitHub site for the project itself. There is your fork, which is part of your particular GitHub repo that, like for me, it's Ronald Sumida. And then there's your local machine. And what we're talking about making changes so far up to this point where my mouse cursor is right now, these are all local machine changes, right? Even the commit. The next step beyond that is now to push up to your GitHub repo, not to the public one, but to your GitHub repo. And the reason why it's not to the public one is you don't have permission to push up to a public GitHub repo. So you got to push to your fork of the GitHub repo. And then after you've done that, you then make a pull request. And then it's up to the maintainers to evaluate your pull request and decide whether they want to merge that in with the overall project. That's the idea. The way that you do the push to your GitHub repo differs depending on whether you created a separate branch in the step. If you did create a separate branch, then you'll need to do it this way. Git push --set -upstream origin, and then the branch name that you chose when you ran this, git checkout -v. If you did not create a separate branch, again, I don't encourage you to do it that way, but if you did not, then you just run git push, and you can push up to your local GitHub repo that way. All right, I want to demo this to you. Oh, this is done. That's good. So from this point now, we have cloned to the local machine. I want to show you what it looks like when we've done the clone. So what you'll do, let's say I wanted to make a change to this Node.js project. You're now looking at my local clone of that project. At this point, I would want to get into the directory where it resides. Very important note, if you're not too familiar with Git in general, this folder is key, the .git folder. That's what's maintaining all the infrastructure info so that when you do things like go to push, for example, it knows where to push to. Because if you notice, you're not specifying any of that information other than you're specifying a branch, but you just say --set -upstream and origin and the branch name. But how does it know where to go to? How does it know to connect that up to your GitHub repo? Well, all that information is contained in that .git folder. So the reason I'm telling you this is, number one, so you understand a little bit of how that works. But number two, be very careful about this. Do not delete that .git folder. That's very important folder to be aware of, and there's no reason in general for you to go touching or modifying what's in there. I mean, you can obviously double click on it and see what's in there, but I would not advise you to ever mess with that stuff unless you had some compelling reason why you were doing that, right? Normally, that is just there to maintain by the infrastructure of Git, so it keeps track of, like when you issue these commands, it does the right thing. Okay, so then from there, if you wanted to make your contribution, the next step would be to open up your favorite development environment. Let's say it's a coding contribution, or maybe it's not even a coding contribution, but it is just editing files. Then again, I use Visual Studio Code for this. You would then come in and open up, as soon as code gets set up here, open up that folder. So I'll choose File, Open Folder, and I will go to that folder right there that we just cloned. Select folder. And then now you're off and running. You can make whatever changes that you would like to make to this repo. But there's something I want to show you here. I'm actually not going to do it with this repo again because I don't want to mess with Node.js, right? What I will do is I'm going to do that first contributions one. The first contributions one that I was showing you is one that I've already cloned prior to the session because I thought it was going to take me longer to clone another one. But it's in here, demos reactor copy folder that I have. This is the first contributions one that I was showing you. I'm going to get into the content of that one. And I'm actually going to make a change to something in here because I want you to see the entire process. So you guys can try this out because, again, that first contributions GitHub project is intended for you to play around like this. Obviously, the ones like Node.js are not intended for that. And one of the things you can do is you can go under contributors, this contributors.md file, and you'll see a lot of other people have come in and done exactly what I'm doing right now, which is they list themselves as a contributor. So I'm going to do that. I'm not actually going to do a pull request because by the time the pull request gets approved, likely the session will be over. But at least I can show you the process. So I'm just going to put my name in here, like those other folks up above have done. And then in parens, I'll put in the link to my particular GitHub repo. It's following the same format that everybody else is doing, which I can find out from right here. All right, I'll just click there and then copy it from the browser like that. And then there's another technique I want to show you so that you don't necessarily have to remember all those command line Git bits that I went through a moment ago. There's a great tool. There's a couple of different desktop UI tools that are really great for working with Git. There's Git Desktop. That's one of them. You can see that from the marketplace here. Desktop. You can search for that in the marketplace. That's one place. Or I already have this installed on my machine, and I love it. Git Extensions. It's another desktop app. It itself is an open source project, as a matter of fact. So let me launch this and show you. For example, I just made a modification to a local copy of the Git repo for first contributions. So I'm going to go there, actually. Let me get into Git Extensions when it comes up. It is, I just dismissed that first scan. It takes a few seconds for it to finish initializing here. But once it does, then I'm going to point it off to that clone of the repository that we made, because it's already been cloned. Everything is all there. So let me find this spot right here. This is the location where the .git folder resides, by the way. So I'm just going to open that because it's already set up, given the fact that I did the clone previously. And one of the reasons I love this tool, and one of the reasons I tend to use this personally, as opposed to using the command line, although I think you should know both, is that this UI aspect where I can see the tree of the previous commits. And that can be very, very useful, right? The old thing of pictures worth 1,000 words does in some respects apply here. So I like to be able to have this view of it. And then this allows me to also see what branches are there and whether I am in sync between my GitHub repo and the local cache I'm working from. So master would tell me this is the current local branch. The origin master would be the remote one. In other words, the one for my GitHub repo. In other words, github.com/Ronald Sumida, right? And I could tell right now that these two are aligned. But here's another thing I like about it. I can also see the current status, given the fact that right here it shows me commit and one. If I click on that, it will bring up a dialog that shows me the changes that I've made so far from the last commit. And right there, it shows me here's the diff. Here's the line that I added in. And remember, I talked about what you would do to stage and then ultimately do the commit. You can do that without even remembering the commands at all if you use this tool. For example, this button right here will stage the currently selected change. If there's more than one and you want to stage them all, you can click on this button right here, stage all. And you can just hover your mouse over to figure out which one's which. So I'm going to use this tool just for a little variety. My slides already have in it the commands if you want to do a command line. But because I want to show you a little bit of different ways to do the same thing, I'm going to do it this way. Contributors.md. And then I'm going to come into here. And again, following what I told you about best practices, it would be to put in a descriptive message for this commit. So I'm going to say add. And by the way, there's even some slides that I have coming up about when you make a pull request, for example, on your commits, how to properly label them, some best practices. But I'll just say add myself, or I'll just say myself, add myself as contributor, or something along those lines, right? The main thing is that you know what this commit represents down the road. All right, you can either commit or you can commit and push. And if I commit and push, it's going to actually push it all the way up to the my local GitHub repo. But I'm going to do a commit first because I'll show you this one in isolation. And if you want to see what commands it's executing, you can just look right here in the little dialog that comes up. And I'm going to say OK. And then that allows me to show you the state of the world after the commit. Notice how the local master advanced by one, but origin master stayed where it was. The reason is because we didn't commit and push. All we did was just commit. So we're just working from the local directory here. And that .git folder is maintaining the information about, the branches and where they are. And then if I want to push separately, I can go to commands and I can choose push. Now, one of the things that's going to happen when I push is, again, I'm going to go back to my local GitHub site. I'm going to find that repo that we're working with right now, first contributions copy right here. I'm going to go to there. And at the moment, there's been no changes because we haven't pushed. But I'm going to push in a second, and then we should be able to see that there's a change on this site when we come back to it. All right. So here's how you go about doing the push. Commands and just do straight up push. And then this indicates branch to push, master to master. Now, one thing I didn't do, I violated exactly what I mentioned to you guys not to do. I didn't set up a separate branch for the change. Let me go back around and take this. Oh, I already did a commit. Oh, I really wanted to do a separate. That's okay. I'll just go forward. But it would have been better if I had done a branch. I literally did what I told you guys not to do. It would be a whole lot better if I did that. I'm going to roll this change back for one. Okay. I've kind of created a little bit of a stickier situation for myself. I'll go ahead and reverse it, create a branch, then I'll make the change with the branch. That's what I'll do. Or I'll just do this. I will create a branch now. And so here's where you can create a branch, by the way. You can create new branch here. And then I will, or, I could do this too. I can roll back to this level and say rebase current branch on selected commit. This, by the way, is very dangerous what I'm doing, but we don't have a lot at stake here. It's not a big deal. And this will get me back to say, but this allows me to demo something else that I had mentioned too about why you should commit often. Because if you make a mistake like I did, it's very easy to roll back the change by doing what I just did. And hopefully, if I do an F5 and come back, did that rebase it? Let me see. I want to do a rebase branch. I want to do a reset current branch here. That's what I meant to do. And I want to do a leave working. I want to do a hard reset all working directory and index. That's what I want. This is very dangerous. Normally, you don't want to do what I'm doing now, but I just want to get back to where I was. And that way I can restore. There we go. Now we're back to where we were originally. By the way, the change when I come back to here, you see it's not there anymore. And now I have an opportunity to redo it. All the more reason why, unintentional demo of what I was talking about why you should commit frequently. Because now I can easily go back to where I was a moment ago, restore the state of the world, and then do the right thing like I meant to do, which is to create a new branch. So I'm going to do that right now. I'll say that I want to create branch. I'm going to call it feature. Remember, I was saying that when you're doing development, that's often what you give as the name. I'm going to say OK there. And then now you see not only is feature show up as a branch, but that little arrow is showing me the currently active branch. So now when I make a change, that change will be off the feature branch. And now I can come back and do what I did a moment ago with this change. So I'll just put in my name and put in parens that URL for my own personal GitHub right there. I just usually like to copy it, by the way, so I don't make a mistake in typing. Not that it matters for this, just a habit. Okay, so now we have this change occurring. I'll go back to where I was with the commit. I will stage it. And then I'm going to specify the message for the commit, add myself as contributor. But it's got a meaningful name to it. I'm going to do a commit and push all in one shot because I know that I've already shown you what I wanted you to see a moment ago. All right. It says the branch you're about to push seems to be a new branch for the remote. Are you sure you want to push this branch? I'm going to say yes. It indicates that it needs a tracking reference. I'm going to say yes to that. That's fine. It's just creating effectively the branch on the remote, an equivalent branch on the remote. Keeping in mind, this is not going up to the public GitHub site at all. This is just going to my local GitHub repo. Okay, now I'm going to come back to my local GitHub repo here. I will go back to that project right there that I forked. And there we go. I was looking for that. You see this comes up, compare and pull request. So when you go and do what we just did, which is to summarize the steps, I forked to get the project here. I cloned to get it to my local machine. I made a modification on my local machine. I then pushed up to the repo here. And when I did that push, it sees GitHub is smart enough. And note where we are. Well, again, we're not on the public one. We're on my GitHub repo. GitHub is smart enough to see that there was the change. And now it gives you the opportunity to compare what was there originally with the change you made and to do a pull request. So I'm going to click there, compare and pull request. And now you are seeing the form that allows you to submit the pull request. And then before filling that out and submitting it, you have the opportunity to review the changes down below. So this is exactly where you want to be and exactly the methodology that you generally want to follow for setting up your contribution to the GitHub project. Right? And if I like what I see, and I'm not actually going to do it again because this now is going to submit it publicly to that site, and then the reviewers will review it. And given the nature of this particular project, they'll approve it and then ultimately merge that into the contributions file. But I don't need to do that. This is enough so that I think you guys can see the process. But this is the last step now of submitting your pull request. It may not be the last step to get it approved, but it's the last step of submitting your pull request. Okay. Let me just get back to the slides for a moment. So this is exactly what you saw on the screenshot there. Compare and pull request button. You click on it, and now you fill in the title and the description. You click on create pull request. You need to fill in all the required information with enough context so the maintainers understand the changes. And you may want to specify an issue number that you want to link back to if what change you are making is related to some existing issue. Then best practice is to indicate the issue number. And again, you know how to see that because we looked at the issues page before. Finding the issue number is pretty easy from that. And then best practice is for you, if your change is related to some existing issue out there, to specify that issue number. That makes it easier for everyone on the back end of this process. And by the way, that's located next to the issue title. In fact, I showed that to you earlier. Now, I mentioned this about status checks. Since I'm not actually going to submit a pull request, I'm not going to demo this to you, but I want to make you aware that this may happen when you submit the pull request. But again, not all GitHub projects have this. You may see a section with status checks at the bottom. They're automated checks from the maintainers for ensuring consistent project quality. And the pull request has to pass all the automated checks for it to be accepted. And failures, if you get a failure, there'll be a details link that will provide further information about what to do to fix the problems that are causing your pull request to not pass. And you can use the comments, by the way, to ask the maintainers for help. In other words, if you just can't figure out why it's being rejected by the automated checks, then you can communicate with the maintainers to say, hey, I don't understand why I'm having this problem. Excuse me. Just so you know, I believe, recovering from COVID right now. So that's why I occasionally get a little bit of a flare up. Okay. This is a screenshot of what a status check might look like if an automated status check rejected your submission of the pull request. And again, you can click here to get details to find out additional information. Right. And only those with right access to the repository can merge the pull requests. That makes sense. And other than that, that's the main things you need to know about this part of it. All right. Now, what about asking for guidance or reviews on status checks? You can get the maintainers' opinions if you're unsure about some of the changes. It may be the case that you are thinking that your changes are good enough, but you might not be entirely sure. You can specify comments directly on the pull request. Also, another possibility is to create what's called a draft pull request. And that's used for changes that are a work in progress. So you might want to ask for guidance or help from other contributors. And it's just what its name implies. It's a draft of a pull request, not a full-blown pull request like you were seeing a moment ago. Here are the possible outcomes from a pull request. Best case scenario, all the changes are approved. It gets merged into the code base. Another scenario, it requires some changes. If they tell you it requires changes, don't be discouraged. You want to look closely at the feedback. There's a good chance that it will be accepted if you make the changes that are requested by the maintainers. And the pull request, you should know, is automatically updated if new commits are pushed to the branch. So whatever branch, this is why it's a good idea, create a separate branch like I demoed to you a moment ago. And if they come back with comments about what changes should be made to your pull request, you can make those changes, commit them up to your repo. And when you do that, automatically pull requests will get updated. Maintainers can look at that and decide whether they like the changes you made. And it may be an iterative process for a while. The reviewer may make comments as well. That usually means that more details are required about the changes and the motivations behind those changes. When you respond to the pull request comments from the contributors or from the reviewers of some sort, Follow these things. These are common sense, of course, but be respectful. Remember the code of conduct I showed you at the beginning of this session. You want to follow that. There's likely to be an ongoing discussion with the maintainers and contributors. So you have to be tolerant of that process. Of course, you got to be patient, like I mentioned earlier. I can't emphasize how important that is. Very big faux pas that you want to avoid committing is reaching out to the maintainers privately. This gets back to the patience issue, right? That if you see they're not responding to you immediately, the temptation is, well, let me look up if I can find on the internet their private email address or private contact info. That is considered harmful behavior. I would strongly encourage not doing that. There's a reason why they have all this infrastructure in place to communicate about the project, and that is the proper vehicle of communication with the maintainers. And public discussion, another reason to do this publicly. I know it can be painful, especially if people are being critical of your work, to have that all out in public. But keep in mind something about the public discussion. It gives other contributors and other people who might be first-time contributors, just like you might be initially, to learn from the process, to see how the entire process of these changes being made works. And also, it is a chance for everyone to learn about best practices regarding this project. A good commit message, I mentioned about how good commit messages should describe the changes. And you saw how I tried to be very careful to at least be descriptive in my commit message. But here are some of the more formal rules regarding a good commit message. A Git message should complete the following sentence. If applied, your commit will ... And that would be your subject line. You want to contain a succinct description of the change. You want to use imperative present tense. So in other words, use add rather than added or adds. I'll be honest. I initially, when I first started doing commits, used added. I would use past tense, but best practice is to use present tense instead. You want to limit your subject line to 50 characters. You'll get a sense of this if you use, for example, this is one of the reasons I like to use it. If you use Git extensions like I showed, and you make a change and you saw that commit button and how I was labeling my commit, it doesn't, if you try to specify a commit line that's longer than 50 characters, the additional characters, it'll highlight them in yellow if your commit is too long. In fact, I could show that to you really, really easily. I'll just change like one character in this file, save it, and then I'm going to go back over to here. You'll see, oh, it's a little slow to catch up to me. Usually it's pretty quick. There we are. So I'll click there, and if I'll just start typing stuff in here. Again, keep in mind this is my local, all being done locally. It's not going to go out there, but you'll see if I make this too long, it will highlight the extra characters beyond the 50 in yellow. So another reason why I like to use this tool is you'll know it pretty quickly if you're violating some of these rules, because it'll tell you that your commit is too long as far as the message goes, as opposed to doing it this way, where you use the command line and you can make it as long as you want for your commit message. But the problem with that is, you're violating effectively the best practice rules there. Right? You want to start with the capital letter and don't end with a period. You can use emojis in the subject line and also do an @ mention of other GitHub users, but that can be annoying. So I would use that sparingly. Right? The body of the message and the pull request, you should follow these rules. Continue to use present tense, just like we talked about doing in the commit message. You should do the same thing in the body. Include the motivation for the change. Contrast the change with the previous behavior. You want to explain the what and the why versus the how. And then commit, and I mentioned this earlier, but here it is formally on the slide. Commit or submit small, isolated sets of changes that will increase the likelihood that the changes will be merged into the project, as opposed to waiting all at once with a huge number of changes and trying to submit that all at once. That is not particularly a good practice. Right? A couple of last things, you want to try to add granularity. So check the sidebar for ways to complete the PR, the pull request. You may want to, as you get familiar more and more with the community and you know who the players are, you may want to select the reviewers and assignees if you're familiar with the team structure of the project, because that way you can direct it to those folks that you have identified from having followed the issues for a while are appropriate candidates to review what you're doing. You want to add labels if guidance is provided. right? Like contributing.md file. And example labels in the repository for this module are bug, documentation. You saw that. Bugs are usually flagged in with a red color scheme if something isn't working. Blue for improvements or additions to the documentation. Gray for duplicate issue if the PR already exists. And teal is the color for enhancements or new features or requests. Again, I've seen different color schemes used, though, for different labels depending on the project. You want to link issues in the sidebar. This is optional. But for successfully merging pull requests, it might close a corresponding issue as well. That's why it can be useful. If you're addressing maybe multiple issues, that's where that can be significant. You can customize the subscription to notifications on the thread. So this is a way so that some PRs may receive comments, reviews, and CI/CD notifications. And here are the different levels of notifications. Not subscribed, meaning you'll only receive notifications when you participated or you were @ mentioned by somebody else. Subscribe means you're going to receive all notifications for this pull request, because there may be a number of different notifications that occur. And if you want to receive all of them, then you can specify subscribed. And custom would be only be notified for events that you particularly select. Here is the GitHub site that I was working on for the demo. I would encourage you as an exercise to go and try that out, to go and try the process that I demoed all the way up to submitting the pull request fully. As I mentioned to you, I didn't do that just because it probably will take a little bit of time before they approve the pull request, in which case I wouldn't be able to demo anything other than just filling out the form. But for you, if it's the first time you're doing the whole process, it would make sense for you to go through and try it out first with a site that's intended for that purpose. Some other things you can do: get involved with the community, find active community members. So you can select insights in the repository navigation, select contributors to find other active members, visit some GitHub profiles. Other ways: attend meetups and conferences on open source topics. And some projects may even have a separate centralized communication mechanism. So these might be referenced in the project's website or the README file. They might have, for example, a Slack community that you can talk to other community members with. But getting involved with the community is very, very potentially valuable, especially if you plan to make a lot of contributions to that project. Becoming part of the community starts to become even more critical, because it will make the process a whole lot smoother as you get more experience with that particular project you're looking to contribute to. One other aspect, too, that you should know is about code reusability. The code that you are suggesting might benefit other projects as well. And you might want to publish this as a standalone library and then mirror or fork the project with added functionality. And this can be useful when you're solving a narrow case for a small subset of customers, and you need to keep the fork up to date to benefit from upstream repo security patches. That's one issue. By the way, when you fork like we did, one of the things you got to be a little bit careful of is it's a moving target. You created a copy in your local repo that is good for the moment when you forked it. But because these open source projects are changing all the time, you have to be very careful to periodically make sure that what you have in your GitHub repo matches what is up in the centralized one. A way to do that very easily is you can run the git pull command, and that will pull the changes from the global GitHub repo to your particular one. And there are GitHub actions that you can use for others to include in their workflow. These are packaged scripts that automate tasks in the software development workflow. And if you are going to be in attendance at my Reactor session tomorrow, I'm going to be demoing that. I'm going to be talking all about GitHub actions tomorrow. And not only that, but also I'm going to be doing some demos of Azure DevOps as well. So that's just a little preview. I don't know if any of you are planning to be on that one. I know it's late in the day today, and the one tomorrow is pretty early in the morning. So it's not too many hours from now. But I just got reminded of that because a couple of the demos I'm going to do tomorrow are going to be about GitHub Actions. All right, to wrap up, what we talked about in this session is contributing to an open source project and what is involved in doing that. You saw that it involves finding projects first that are appropriate for you to contribute to, and also tasks within that project where you can make a contribution. And some of the procedures that I showed you for navigating around in a GitHub site can be very valuable for getting that process started. The steps involved: fork the repository. You, of course, have to set up your GitHub account first before you can fork the repository. But assuming you've done that, set it up, log in, and then fork the repository to get it into your GitHub, to get it into your GitHub site. Then clone it to your local machine, make whatever changes you would like to make, then go about committing those changes. Remember, you should, as best practice, create a separate branch before you make the changes. Then go create a descriptive pull request, making sure also that your commit before you make that pull request is labeled with the rules that I talked about here and is very descriptive, and see what response you get back from the pull request. And then along the way, implement the best practices, communicating with the open source maintainers and other contributors, and find and engage open source communities that you might want to become a part of. That is about it. I have finished with about 5 minutes to spare, so I'll take any questions that anybody might have.
Yes, we have quite a few.
Okay.
So the first one is there any response? Sorry, I messed up the question. I apologize. Is there any problem forking a repository just to keep up to date about it instead of watching it?
No problem with that. I mean, it's all going into your local GitHub login. So, you can fork whatever is of interest to you. And that might be a good thing to do. In fact, before even getting into, the process of contributing to a project, you may just want to track it for a while. And that would be a great way to do that, actually.
The next question is, do we need to follow the commit message recommended like it does for Linux kernel?
I'm not familiar specifically with the Linux kernel conventions, but the commit conventions generally are pretty uniform from what I've seen. So I would certainly follow these rules that I mentioned here about the commits. And right here, that's a body, this one, a good commit message describing the changes. However, if it is anything, that is like sort of specific to Linux, then, it may not apply universally. But these are pretty much the very well-established rules of commit labeling.
So there was a question about the last pull, or there was a request for you to do the last pull request. And the question for that last pull request was, why do we need to write 2 comments when doing a pull request?
Why do you need 2 comments when doing a pull request? So was that related? Let me see.
So they asked if you could do the last pull request, and then their question was referring to that.
So that would be like submitting the last pull request, I assume, is what they're referring to. But yeah, I'm not quite
Maybe they can confirm on that.
Yeah.
I'll skip over to the next question while I have them re-ask that question.
Okay.
So the next one is, sorry.
By the way, I'm speculating what the question might be, but don't confuse this, which is the subject of the pull request, with the commit message. It just happened that this populated automatically, right? But this may not exactly be necessarily what you put in the subject, right? That, they're 2 separate things in reality. It may have caused confusion because this just got populated automatically from the name of the commit, the message of the commit, more precisely. I don't know if that answered the question, but that's as best I can figure from what I understand of the question. Anyway, next question.
Yes, sorry, let me scroll back up. Could we handle more than one GitHub account in GitHub Git extension or in command line GitHub CLI?
Can you have more than one? Can you say it again? More than one GitHub account?
Yes, in Git extensions.
In Git extensions. Oh, I see. Git extensions deal with more than one GitHub account. I believe so. I think, but that's a really good question. I have come to think of it, I don't know that I've ever tried that because I only have one GitHub account. But I believe you can do that. I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head how. Let me see. Let me take a quick look and see if there's anything here. See if I can figure it out. If it's obvious right out of the box, because yeah, and in fact, I'm almost certain you can, because Git extensions really doesn't care the account that it's coming from. It's all based on the .git folder. So all you have to do is point Git extensions to the folder that has the .git folder, and that .git folder will have all the information about the account that the local Git cache is linked to. So if you look at Git extensions, it doesn't have anything that's specific to an individual account. All of that information is contained in that .git folder. While I haven't explicitly tested this, I'm very certain that what I'm saying will work. So in other words, if you have one folder, let's say, with a .git folder inside of it that is working off of one Git repo, Git account, and another Git-related folder that has a .git inside of it that works with another Git account, I don't think Git extensions is going to care. I think it'll work fine with both. I would almost bet on that.
Next question is, how can you see contributes just clicking without by typing in URL?
Oh. Can you say it again? I'm sorry, I was coughing.
Oh, no worries. I'm in the same boat. Totally understand. How can you see contributes just clicking without typing in URL?
How can you see contributions just by clicking without typing in the URL? So let me go back to a GitHub page first, to one of the GitHubs. Let's go here. Let me do the search first and find one of the more public ones. Otherwise, if I go to my page again, it's going to go to the ones that I have locally. So, all right, and let's find matplotlib again. Oh goodness, matplotlib. I want to make sure I understand the question properly here, because I don't think I left that page open. Here we go. All right, and we want to see was it contributions, right? And the question was to be able to see the contributions without putting it on the back end of the URL, but just to look at the by clicking. I don't know that there is a way directly off. I mean, basically everything that I know of is here. I don't see. In other words, I think the question is this: can we get to here
instead of adding it to the URL?
Contributions. What was it? Was it contributions or?
It's contributes.
Oh, contributes. Okay.
Contributes. I'm sorry.
Contributes. Yeah, like that. Yeah. Oh. No, there isn't a. Contributions would really be done in the form of pull requests. So unless I'm misinterpreting what the person is asking, and the pull requests are here. These are the contributions. Are the pull requests, right? There isn't, as you saw, there's not a separate / contributes thing, unless you're talking about something else. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking. You have issues, labels, pulls are what we looked at before. I'm looking at the history. But if you're looking for the contributions and what contributions have been made, that's always done in the form of a pull request. So you can click right there and see all that information about the contributions from that. The other way to do it would be / pulls on the back end of the URL.
And then the next question is, are these standard for these labels in issues panel?
Is there a standard for the labels in the issues panel? Loosely, I would say. Again, it's as far as the labels go. So let me find that again. Labels here. In fact, I was curious a little bit about this, so I kind of looked into it, and it's like I said, it seems to vary somewhat depending on the project. I didn't find, and that makes sense too, right? Because some of these can be very specific to an individual project. Like these are GUI related. Generally though, what I was mentioning here, let me go back to my slide deck. So there are some that are much more universal. So the ones that I mentioned here, example labels in the repository for this module, bugs are in red, documentation in blue, duplicates gray, enhancements in teal. You generally see that is basically like what we have here. Documentation ones are in blue, right? I don't know that there's bugs showing up here, at least on the first page. But generally, I've seen that's fairly consistent, right? But, for the others, in fact, here's one, release critical. Let's see. Yeah, bugs. So they're pretty much following that. I think these are well enough accepted, but for other types of labels, given how specific they can get to an individual project, and you get a sense of that from looking here, you might see entirely different color schemes from one project to the next. I don't know that there's that much uniformity on that. But for the standard ones like mentioned here, I would say this pretty much seems to be fairly universal across a number of projects. Be interesting. Let me see another one. I was looking at this one too. I'll go back to the search for a second. Looking at the Jupyter notebooks. Let's take a look at that one, because I was also seeing what conventions they use. It's kind of interesting now, having gone through this. Jupyter, I can't remember how to spell Jupyter. They do an odd spelling. It's Jupyper. I believe that's correct. I should be close enough to get the hit. There we go. I got it right finally. And it's kind of interesting now, having gone through all of this, to see what conventions I need labels on the back end, to see what conventions they follow, and to see how much it differs from project to project. So looking at this one, let's see what they have. Yeah, see what comes up on the first. See, there you go. Documentation is not in blue. So as far as color schemes, I wouldn't even say that, blue being in the background is necessarily uniform, because you're seeing right here another machine learning related project, another very valuable machine learning tool, and they use an entirely different scheme for their labels versus what's used by Matplotlib. And that's what I remember seeing as I looked around at a number of these. So what I would do is I would look at the individual project, look at the labels there, and figure out the color scheme. And you can see that right here from again, putting / labels on the back end. Once you know how their color scheme goes, then you know how to identify things within that project. But you move to another project, you'll have to look at their labels to see how they do it, because clearly it's not uniform.
Are there any standards for the labels in the Issues tab?
Any standards for the labels in the Issues tab? Across projects, apparently not. Within a project, typically yes. In fact, let me see. Let's see if GitHub says anything about what they view as labeling standards. That's one thing I'm curious about, because I don't know. I might have looked at that a while ago, but let's see. GitHub labeling standards. In fact, I remember looking at this. In fact, it's my history. The label color coding to see. And there are some guides out there, like this one, that, I was just looking this up recently. And that's why it was in my search history. So you might want to look here for more general guidance labels. But you see how people don't follow this universally. But yeah, bugs in red. Let's see what they say. Repo specific labels that categorize what parts of the application are being changed. See repo for specifics. That one's blue, but it doesn't say documentation, for example, is blue. But this is not a bad place to at least. Enhancements are supposed to be this kind of light bluish color, and these I would go to here because this is right from GitHub, from a GitHub site. Manage IQ guides, but again, given that there seems to be a lack of uniformity across this is as close as I was able to find in terms of a guide. In fact, here isn't it interesting? A GitHub discussion about this issue. What color scheme do you use for GitHub labels? So like I said, for me, I wouldn't, given that there's even a discussion about this to begin with, tells me there is no uniformity on this. And knowing that, I would say just get familiar with the labels about whatever project you're looking at, because you're not going to see uniformity across the projects. And I'm curious about this one, because this is docs.github.com, managing labels, about labels. Here's a good place, because this is coming. I always try to look for the sites from the docs themselves. So this is the place to go if you want to know answers to these types of questions from GitHub itself, but knowing that there doesn't seem to be a universally accepted standard, at least in practice. But at least this will give you an idea of the general categories of labels: bug, documentation, duplicate, enhancement, good first issue, help wanted. You saw some of these being used in the projects we were perusing, but because this is coming right out of the GitHub documentation, this is the place that I would look to go to, at least as a starting point. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, I just lost my place. So for that pull request that we had a couple minutes ago where they were going to clarify, will you do the actual steps for it? Their question then. So could you do the last pull request? Their question goes into the comments that happened during that process.
Oh, you mean they actually wanted me to do the pull request? Really? Okay,
yes,
I can do it. Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah,
that was my misunderstanding.
Yeah, I mean, for this, like I said, I didn't do it just because, I probably won't get the response. But I can do it certainly. For this though, unfortunately, I'm not making a code change. So, I don't know that I would have much to put in terms of a comment. What I would do is I might change this if I knew it was going out publicly to say, here's my name, I might put that in parentheses to indicate that it's me as a contributor. Then to do the rest of the process, I can indicate either create pull request or create draft pull request here. I mentioned this earlier. And then one other thing maybe what you want to see is a draft pull request, because this way it won't even be merged until marked ready for review. I mean, let me reach out to whoever's asking this question. Would you be okay if I did this as a draft pull request as opposed to a full pull request? I mean, I'll do it as a full pull request if you really want, but given I didn't make a code change or anything, there's not a whole lot to this request in particular.
I'm waiting for them to respond.
Okay. Because as you can see, there's two different types of pull requests, a draft and a full-blown one.
Okay, it can be a draft.
Okay, let me just do that one then. So we'll set that up as a draft pull request. Again, you can look down below at the other bits, and then let me go ahead and I'll just click on it, waiting for API GitHub, and then here we go, like this. So this pull request is so I assume this is what they wanted to see. The result of what comes back out is this, which is add more comments by pushing the feature branch. So this is what you can see by pushing the feature branch on this to first contributions copy. So note what the maintainers are going to see. They're going to know I have a separate feature branch where I made the change that can be merged in, and then here's where I can leave comments depending on the comments I get back from the reviewers, and I can, given that this is still a work in progress, I can, now this cannot be merged given that
the question, I'm sorry for interrupting. So the question is, yes, why do we have another leave a comment text box?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because you may want to specify on the pull request itself, following those formal rules, but you may want to provide additional clarification or even attach, like indicating here, files for dragging and dropping, additional things that maybe you don't want to go out there as part of the direct pull request body itself, but you want this to be additional comments that you can engage with the maintainers for. That's why you have this additional bit in there, right?
So the next question is, is there a way to tie together work items or bugs/issues and pull requests?
Tie them together. Like multiple issues, I'm assuming that might be outstanding. Yeah, here's a couple things about that. One, as I mentioned, I would particularly look to solve a single issue with a pull request as opposed to trying to solve multiple issues with one straight pull request. I mentioned that earlier about it's important to make your changes relatively small in a pull request. That's generally best practice. However, if it turns out that the change you are making does happen to resolve multiple issues, then to tie it together, that's what I mentioned earlier about linking to an earlier issue. So let me find the slide on that, where right here about the pull request description, you can specify the issue number so you can use this to link back to a related issue. And if there's related issues that you have identified where your pull request might relate to more than one of them, then you might want to specify those. And that's a way of linking that all together.
So we have another correction to a question from earlier. So you wrote contribute after the repository name and the URL.
Okay.
Can you go there without writing it in the URL?
Without writing it in the URL. Well, if I don't go there, let me pick this one, for example. So without writing contribute in the URL at all, then I get to the central page. And if like I said, if I write contribute on the back end, then it says not found. But I'm assuming where you want to go with this /contribute. Oh, okay. So yeah. I see. Oh, this one does have it. Oh, the other one didn't. Interesting. So it just so happens that the one I was working with, matplotlib, when you put contribute on the back end, didn't have it. This one actually happens to have it. No, I don't believe that I don't know of any way if there is one. And given the fact that it doesn't seem to be uniform in GitHub, I want to just verify that. I'm going to go back to the matplotlib one and that contribute, that there's no page from matplotlib on contribute, which tells me that it's not uniform, and therefore it probably won't have a link directly on the GitHub site. Let me just double check to see if I might have messed that up. No, okay, no, I must have mistyped something earlier. Okay, yeah, okay, so here it is. It does appear to be more uniform. Can you get there without putting that on the back end of the URL? I don't recall any way. I know a way I could figure it out though. In fact, we can do that. This is like a heavy duty, maybe overkill way, but if there were a link on the page somewhere that would allow me to do this, it would show up in the HTML. So I'd be able to right click and say view page source in the browser. And then I know the URL and I could just match it up by searching. And then I can, in turn, if it does show up, match that back against the link we're looking for. So let's see. Yeah, see, I don't see anything with that as contribute. Let's see if there's any link for this. It doesn't show up. It doesn't give me an error of anything. Yeah, I suspect there isn't because I'm literally looking. Let me look for contribute on here in the original page source because presumably the link would have that. Yeah, I'm not seeing that show up. So, oh, wait. Oh, no, it is showing. It's just slow to catch up to me. Here we go. Now, was I on the right page? Oh, I was on the contribute page when I did that. I want to not be on the contribute page. I want to go back to this page, then search for contribute and see if I find it. That's a way to tell, right? Because I off the top of my head, I don't know a way to just navigate to there, but let me right click. Let me do an inspect. We know, oh, this one has a contribute like link at the bottom of the page. Hang on, let me go back to there. 1 second. Not to that. There we go. See, this one has an explicit contribute section I thought I saw. Yeah, see, it has an explicit contributing section, contribute guide. And my bet is, given that they have that, and the other one, let me go back to the Jupyter Notebooks one, it didn't, I don't think it had that section. So that makes me wonder if the reason why they added it in there was due to the fact that they don't, that it's not universal, but I want to prove that. So let's do right click, view source, view page source. Where's the view page source there? And see if a contribute of any sort shows up in the page source. And this way I can tell whether at least there might be a link there. So let's see. Does contribute show up? Or is this slow too? But I'm not seeing anything with contribute in there. So I kind of doubt it. Yeah. By now, I think it would have shown up. I don't think this is a lag issue. I suspect that there literally is not a link for that. Let me double check this. Oh, repo contributors. I see that. Let me look for pull request. Yeah, see pull request and all that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure looking at the page source from the home page, it doesn't appear to be anything like a link. So my bet is the answer is no, unless there's some obscure way to navigate around to that link. And by the way, if you have to go to that much trouble to find the link, here's my feeling. You could just as well put / contribute on the back end of the URL and be able to see it that way.
So the next question is, the Linux kernel commit message must have up to 72 characters by line. Should we use it in other projects?
Oh, no, I would not. Yeah, if it's 72 characters per line, and they have, their own specific ways of doing things, I would probably not follow that if it doesn't match up with the conventions you see elsewhere. So some of that may be, again, specific to the way that the Linux contributions are meant to be done. You may want to look at the contribution guide, to see because that could vary a bit by project as well, right? So let me go back to here. And yeah, these guys, they don't even have one, but like the matplotlib one, it did. And out of curiosity, I want to see now whether they have guidance. Because again, this can vary a lot. I want labels. This can vary a lot from project to project, potentially even, as to what their guide is. And let's see if they have how explicit their contributing guide is. See, they have ones for writing pull request guidelines, all of that. This is very, very detailed here. What I'm curious about is whether they've got something. Let's look under pull request guidelines and then see beyond that whether they mention about commits and labeling. when updating, instead of adding new commits to fix something, please consider. So here's all of this. Let's see if they say anything about like commit length and all of that. Number of commits and squashing, automated backports, manual backports. Now I don't see anything about length of commits. Search for the length now. I was curious about whether they're really explicit, because this is one of the more explicit ones I've seen. Documentation style guide. Let's look there again, just to see if anything pops out at me regarding commits. No. Comments. And yeah, bottom line though is look at any guidance from the particular project that you're going to be looking to contribute to, and don't necessarily assume that the Linux guidance applies across the board. That's the short answer to the question.
And the next one is, should we rebase our commits to do a pull request, or it depends?
Yeah, I would say that depends. I would not necessarily rebase. In fact, I think they were mentioning here, if you look at the guidance on this one, that last page I was at was mentioning about the commits. And remember, I told you that it's best practice, at least when you're doing development on stuff, to frequently commit. But I think they have their own guidelines here. Let me look for the pull request guidelines. And I was just seeing that on this page about commits. When updating your PR, instead of adding new commits to fix something, please consider amending your initial commits to keep your history clean. You can achieve this by using, and it tells you exactly how to do it. So this gets back to similar to the question that was being asked. I don't want to say universally do this or do this or don't do this when it comes to commits. Read the guidelines like you're seeing with this one, because as you're witnessing right here, Matplotlib has specific recommendations that they have for best practices for how you manage commits. This may not conform to everybody though. So don't assume that just because Matplotlib does it this way that everybody else wants you to do it this way as well. If they have a specific way that they want you to name commits, or they want you, like in this case, to amend your initial commits, leave it up to them to tell you. And if you wonder, it might be a good idea to ask the maintainers, especially before you do something like rebasing, right? Anything else?
Yes, sorry. I just have to keep unmuting myself, and I forget to unmute myself. The other question is, are the issue templates and commit message templates clearly available?
They should be. They should be on any project, yes.
And then we have a lot of thank yous, and they love this session.
Oh, thank you very much. I enjoyed doing it.
And they appreciate you for sharing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but by the way, let me just say a quick note to you guys. I really love the fact that you asked so many questions. That is great. It shows me that you guys are engaged. So thank you very much for being very receptive audience, and to keeping me on my toes as well.
And that was the final question. So thank you to our speaker, and thank you everyone for joining. We'd love to hear your feedback. Please fill out our survey. Let me add the slide onto the screen. For this specific event, it's 15878. And then if you are interested, please join us tomorrow. Ron will be back. Thank you, everyone. Until next time.
Yep. Are you going to be on tomorrow's